Details have emerged about Russia's attack on Ukraine's energy grid. President Zelensky says cluster munitions were used in the massive overnight attack. The Ukrainian president says the Russian Kalibr cruise missiles were particularly dangerous to civilians. Teams are at work all day restoring power. Temperatures in Ukraine are set to drop below freezing. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh reports from central Ukraine.
This is the 11th large-scale attack by Russia on Ukraine's energy infrastructure so far this year. And throughout the night, according to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, 90 missiles and 100 drones fired at targets across Ukraine. Putin saying this was a response to the use of US-supplied Atacms to hit targets inside of Russia, but it's part of Moscow's persistent bid to erode the infrastructure here, the heating, the electricity that's going to keep the lights on and Ukraine warm through what's already becoming a dark and freezing winter. In fact, Zelensky said that some of these Kalibr missiles that were fired and used cluster munitions, particularly harmful to civilians, to hit some of their targets. But it was too, the Kremlin head Vladimir Putin said, a response to the use by Ukraine of US-supplied Atacms missiles to hit targets inside of Russia in the last weeks or so. Escalation here, it seems, almost daily. And Putin taking opportunity today not only to refer to why this occurred because of the Atacms, but also potentially hold out a kind of branch of some description towards President Donald Trump coming to the White House in January, calling Trump an experienced and capable man and suggesting potentially that he might be able to find a, quote, solution. Now that is surely a nod to the diplomacy which many believe Trump will adopt as the US policy going forwards in January, a nod to that certainly through his appointment of a Ukrainian special envoy to Ukraine, and that is General Keith Kellogg, his former national security advisor, who in April wrote extensively about a potential way forward for a peace plan here. It would involve freezing the front lines, taking up negotiation as the formal policy of the United States, asking Ukraine to accept aid, but aid as loans, and the condition for that continuing would be that Ukraine would become part of this peace process too. Russia in turn would get slight sanctions relief for becoming part of the negotiation process, but then I think the details as to how it gets to an end point in where Ukraine could potentially be happier and secure a little fuzzier. The plan in itself seems to accept that the amount of aid the US is currently giving to Ukraine is at its maximum and they can't produce any more, but also seems to suggest potentially that they need to continue and indeed supply Kiev more to secure itself against any future Russian advances. But clearly moves towards diplomacy here and potentially a moment in which Vladimir Putin, a wily and frankly at times cynical negotiator, may find it easier to get what he wants out of the new White House. The news from the front lines though consistently in Moscow's advantage. They're moving forwards on multiple different directions along the Eastern Front, as we saw ourselves over the past week or so. Nick Payton-Walsh, CNN, Central Ukraine.
New overnight, Ukraine says Russia launched 132 drone attacks, but most were shot down. At least 8 people were injured. These latest strikes come after Russia again pounded Ukraine's power grid yesterday. 1 million homes were plunged into darkness and rolling blackouts covered much of the country as the war grinds into its third winter. President-elect Trump has named his choice to serve as special envoy to Russia and Ukraine, retired General Keith Kellogg, a national security advisor in the first Trump administration. Months ago, Kellogg laid out his peace plan for the war, which may now become the diplomatic roadmap ahead. And joining me to talk about this, CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger. He's also the White House national security correspondent for the New York Times and the author of New Cold Wars: China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West. First, David, what do you think of General Kellogg and that selection there?
It was an interesting choice because, Jim, at the beginning of the invasion, now nearly 3 years ago, Keith Kellogg was very much in the "we can't let the Russians do this or gain from the war" camp. Like many Democrats and Republicans, but mostly Republicans, he's now moved to we need an armistice or some kind of cessation of fighting on the way to a bigger peace plan. Now, I actually think this makes sense, but what they're going to have to get over, Jim, is the thought that at the end of the day, the Russians will have gained maybe 20% of Ukraine. Because you can have an armistice, but if it's like the one in between North and South Korea from 1953, the North gained territory from it.
Jij ziet mij misschien 100 keer per dag en ik wil je hier zonder iets te verkopen gewoon even uitleggen waarom. En dat doen we even in mijn Ferrari, zodat je tenminste naar wat leuks aan het kijken bent. En nee, die is niet gehuurd, dat is mijn auto die ik heb gekocht met wat ik doe. Ondanks dat ik het zelf niet altijd super leuk vind om advertenties op die manier te maken,